Hey guys, welcome to the Resto Druid guide for 4.3. It's been a few months since my first Druid guide, and I wanted to thank y'all for your support and questions, and I hope to continue helping you. 4.3 is a large content patch for WoW that includes a new raid and some 5-mans. But that's not what y'all are looking for. The main changes for Druid healing are all based off of one spell, Wild Growth. It has been nerfed considerably, with an across-the-board 20% healing reduction. Its glyph has also changed, so that if you glyph Wild Growth to include an additional person, its cooldown will also increase by 2 seconds. I will explain how this impacts us and what we should do with it later in the guide. Basically, Blizzard is taking the nerf bat to us through our largest throughput spell. It's no bueno, but we'll persevere because we're trees and awesome. Now, I would like to revisit some of the things I talked about in my original guide. To begin with, the haste caps are still the same. You should be hitting 2005 easily by now. One cap I would like to mention is if you are lucky enough to have Shard of Woe off of Sinestra, which will still be best in slot for 4.3. You should be trying to hit the 2027 cap. Once the trinket is activated, you'll get an extra tick of rejuve for the ones you cast while celerity, which is the buff, is up. This is a 1-minute cooldown. This is because the celerity buff from Shard gives you an additional 1935 haste rating. If you add that to your 2027 base haste, you will be able to get a 6th tick of rejuvenation when celerity is active. When I am healing, I use Shard on the cooldown, which is every minute, and try to limit myself to just casting rejuvenations during that time. And, if the time is right, pop trinket at the very end, so its cast time is faster. These little tricks will help maximize your use of the trinket. Spirit versus Mastery. Initially, there was great debate with many of you and myself about why I favor Mastery over Spirit in my builds. It comes down to two things. Do I have problems with mana regen? Yes or no? If yes, then I develop a more spirit-heavy reforge set. If no, then I continue to forge out of it into Mastery. I keep profiles of reforge sets for various fights. I tend to only focus on progression fights, though. I'm not hearthing and changing reforge profiles between fights. That's just silly. Base your profile and spec on the boss you are currently progressing on, and go from there. To make reforging easier, I have a mod called Reforge Saver that saves profiles and will automatically reforge your gear once you've saved your current forge set. I'm sure there are other mods out there that do something similar. That's just the one I happen to use. I tend to go full mastery where I can while still keeping the haste points, and then see how much spirit I have in that set. In this case, I have around 2100. Then I go full mastery while still keeping the haste points, and I have around 2500. The balanced reforge profile, I'll try to hit somewhere in the middle of that, which is about like 225 to 2300. It's not really a science, it's just kind of how I do things. I'm sure people can take it and number crunch it and find breaking points and things like that, but that's just not how I like to play. So, yeah. Wild Growth, then versus now. My thoughts on this is that, technically, without the glyph you will heal 25 people, and with it you will heal 24 people. This is when you use it on cooldown, however. Essentially, if the boss fight requires constant raid healing where Wild Growth on use will be required, I would suggest not glyphing Wild Growth, because you will be able to heal more in that time period. However, if it is a fight where you will only need periodic raid healing, I would still suggest the glyph, since in those situations, the amount of people healed will be more important than how many times in a 10-second span that you can use the spell. Lately, as I've been healing 3 healing Rag, I think, would I glyph Wild Growth in this fight? And that's the question that you're going to have to ask yourself for each and every fight now. If you're going to be using Wild Growth on cooldown, and I mean immediately on cooldown, as soon as it's up, then don't use the glyph. But if you're going to have a bit of lag in between, then I would use it. This is where theory crafting can only take you so far. It's pure math, but healing itself is not. It is important to understand the basic theory of how the changes affect you, though. The question then lies in what major glyph we replace Wild Growth with. The answer is quite simply, no one knows. Innervate glyph is pretty much trash for us, since you shouldn't be using Innervate on anyone but yourself. I will probably end up putting Barkskin in there when I'm not using Wild Growth, but it depends entirely on the fight, and the fights coming up are variable, but super fun. Spec. I have tweaked my basic talent tree spread since 4.2 was released, as was inevitable. For most up-to-date specs, it's just easier to check the armory. I ended up dropping Living Seed and the Regrowth crit of 3 out of 3. Currently I'm spec'd for Rag, so the 2 points that usually are in Nature's Bounty are in Perseverance. That decreases how much damage I take from spells. Everything else is the same. Remember to take Dispel Magic talent, though, if you're in a fight where Dispelling Magic is needed. Don't be that guy. I avoid that talent like the plague, but I will take it when it's needed for boss mans. Also, as I said in my previous guide, if you find that you tank heal a decent amount, especially in 10-mans, then perhaps Living Seed or more Regrowth Crit would be beneficial. I just didn't see it help me as much in my raids. Living Seed only accounted for 2% of my healing, and casting Regrowth for the extra crit plus Living Seed was a mana drain that I didn't want to account for in fights. Rotation. I discussed the rough healing spell priority for druids in my previous guide, and mostly it won't change with 4.3. To recap though, you always keep the life bloom on the tank at 3 stacks. You wild growth whenever is appropriate. On cooldown if you don't care about mana. But please remember that it heals for more in the beginning, so roll Rejuves first if heavy raid damage is about to be taken. Think popping traps for or intermissions for Ragnaros, or Spear for Shanix. And Rejuve forever. Swift Mend should be used on cooldown, preferably on someone who has others stacked on him to benefit from the efflorescence, and regrowth when you need to keep harmony up. Depending on the fight, you might choose to use Healing Touch instead if you have the time, or big predictable heals are needed. So there's the update for 4.3. Please let me know if you have any questions, and thanks for listening.